I do believe there is a lot of things that you can get over time, just like any partnership, or I talk a lot about I call partnerships, even in my own world, I call them friendships, just like your personal friendships. And most people have a lot of Facebook, LinkedIn connections. They know a lot of people, their neighbors, their ecosystem around them that are friends. But you probably have very few best friends in your world. And to get to that point, you're probably into similar things. It takes effort.
Welcome to Unlock Cloud Go-to-Market, the series where hosts Erin and Patrick Riley share the essential stages of the cloud GTM maturity model to start, optimize, and grow your company's revenue through the cloud. They've helped countless ISVs tackle the ins and outs of their cloud GTM motion. And in each episode, they're sharing those success stories from the people who have put them into place. Because ultimately, this way of thinking is the future. And the future is now.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Unlock Cloud Go-to-Market. I'm co-host Patrick Riley.
I'm co-host Erin Feiger.
And today we sit down and talk with Michael Musselman, VP of Partnerships for Astronomer, formerly of Lacework, a Tackle Customer Advisory Board member, as well as an advisor of Caddyshack. He talks to us today in depth about a number of his frameworks, successes, and a ton of great analogies you're definitely not going to want to miss, but also one key fact around how he sees the alliance leaders within a ISV as entrepreneurs and how they run a small business within your larger business. Stay tuned. Today, we are joined by a very special guest, Michael Musselman. He is the VP of Partnerships at Astronomer, formerly of Lacework, and a very trusted Tackle Customer Advisory Board member. Michael, thank you for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Well, today, just as if we've done in every episode, for those of you that are new to join, the idea of this podcast is to help you unlock your cloud go-to-market by going through the Tackle maturity model and dissecting stories from customers and ISVs who have had success, seen challenges, and overcome those challenges on their way to growth. And so the Tackle maturity model is where we look at our customers in 4 different buckets, with establishing foundation being the first bucket, moving up to building adoption, driving adoption, and scaling adoption within the cloud marketplaces. Each of those phases of maturity, we break down into 4 different categories. We focus on people, processes, technology, and alliances. Today, when we talk to Michael, we're going to go into a little bit the establishing foundation phase of maturity. We'll start there, and he's got some great tips throughout. So we might sprinkle in a couple extra scaling tips for you. So stick around for that. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to Erin and we'll get started.
Thanks, Michael, for joining us. I'm so excited for you to share all your years of experiences. You've been at this now for 5-ish years, and share with our audience a little bit about your first time in the role, and now you're doing this all over again at Astronomer. Love to get a little bit more of a background for our audience.
Yeah, I kind of stumbled upon this, and I think it'll come up later in some other discussions about characteristics. And I think I've been successful in it, but I honestly have just been learning a lot. So I was employee 68 at Lacework, which is a cloud security company. Prior to that, I was sales engineering leader at several companies. One was in the cloud. And in that last company, I transitioned from running a worldwide sales engineering team into kind of a business development partnerships role. And so that was a SaaS and I started working with more tech partners. And even though we were built on AWS, I really didn't understand what that thing was all about. So I get to Lacework, I'm employee 68, and we're kind of going to build out what's the partner strategy, tech partners, what do? We don't know. And in all reality, I think because of having the background and being close to the pipeline and being close to sales, I started getting sellers that maybe had come from other companies early on. Let's say it was Snowflake or Sumo Logic or CrowdStrike, or people that already had strong, and they were asking me questions about what's our strategy going to be? How are we going to work with AWS? We're built on AWS. Or I'd have a lot of people, can we transact through the marketplace? And so my first question, I was like, I don't know. Give me a second and we'll go figure this out. Actually, that's exactly how I stumbled on Tackle, because I didn't know enough. So I needed people who knew more than me to help. Turns out the sales team at Tackle were pretty helpful. They knew that. And I figured, well, we could probably figure this out on our own. But at that time, team of one, I didn't have any developers. I didn't know how to build marketplace listings, or I didn't know any of that. So I needed help. And you guys actually were there to help me understand and navigate so that I could go back to my sales team and say, yes, we can transact in the AWS marketplace. Yes. And so that was the first time I met Tackle, and that's kind of that. And then the journey at Lacework was nothing short of amazing, from just figuring out how to partner with a big hyperscaler. In this case, I started with AWS, and what's important to them, and what do they want us to do, and how do they measure us? And then, we'll talk more in deep later about some of these things. But in the very beginning, it was just figuring that out. And then you can't do it alone. So I needed a team to help me. And, we started to use more and more of Tackle's capabilities and apply it to our business differently. And then since then, I've been able to speak with and in front of other audiences, speak with other partners, learn from other partners. And so, it's just been really, really fun journey. And then joining Astronomer, I own all partnerships. So slightly different space. I'm not in security like the last run. I have to think about all partners. So tech, cloud, SIs, VARs, MSPs, OEMs, there's a lot more to consider. But I think the roots are still there, and I'm able to kind of apply the same thing and the experiences and the relationships and maybe get us there a little bit faster. And so I'm happy to share all those experiences, but that's how I got here today.
I was going to bring up Caddyshack and let you plug that for a second, but
that's just honestly I spend little time, but it was a community. What I found is there was very few people that I think understood how to partner with AWS or with Google or Microsoft. And those people, a lot of their value was that knowledge and that experience. And I found some of them were very open to sharing that one-on-one, but I couldn't find very little content. There was no podcast like this. So it's you had to learn either by making friends or by making strong partnerships or by school of hard knocks experience. And so I think what a few of us found was once we kind of figured it out, a lot of people would come to us and ask us for help. That doesn't really scale very well. So the short answer was through Tackle and even your forums and some of those ways. But we also started an AWS community of CADs, Cloud Alliance Directors, called Caddyshack. And so that was a simple way for us to just help others and partner with AWS and give feedback to AWS about tools that they build for us, like ACE and Marketplace. And so I think over time, that's just developed into a really neat complementary to companies like yourself and to AWS and to the community, so that rising tide, it kind of lifts all ships.
You're learning this through grassroots, hands-on experiences. You're pulling together and finding other like-minded individuals. Hey, you're doing this, but it's not just you're in the role. You're also in this role and you're like-minded like me. And so you're starting to pull together like-minded folks and creating this community. What are some of those characteristics that you see in that like-mindedness?
I think you're always looking in the mirror and trying to figure out, okay, if I'm successful in this role or others are asking me for help, I must be doing something right. What is it that I either learned in the decades before I started doing this, or, if I'm going to go hire teams that help me, right? I should hire people who are smarter, faster, whatever. I've just whittled down the characteristics that I look for when I've added people to my team. Right. And then obviously, there's a little bit of a mirror because we have to work together. We have to speak together, and they honestly have to carry out a lot of the strategies that we come up together. I don't know these things. I've learned a lot from the team I hired at Lacework. I still am very close to them, but I look for things like intelligence and curiosity. I look for drive, right? I can't give you what your mama didn't, I always joke and say. I look for this entrepreneurial spirit. And I think there's this book by Carol Dweck called Mindset. And I think there's this fixed mindset and this growth mindset. And I find that entrepreneurial type of people look at a problem and they're like, I have to go solve this, rather than, I can't do that. I don't know how. I don't want to learn something new. And then I just generally, I think, be honest, how would AWS as a partner trust you if you're just not honest with them? So I think those characteristics are what I usually interview for. And I'm looking to build our teams with that. But then what I've realized is those skills make for a really good alliance director or leader, because what people don't see is behind the curtain, we probably spend 80% of our time communicating and selling to our own teams and our own business, and it has nothing to do with the outward facing partnership. And so that's the part where these skills, you don't know how you're going to use them, but you realize they're very handy and helpful for getting what you want out of your partner, but certainly for making your team helpful to the business and helpful to all these other teams in the business.
That's a great point to bring up, that you're looking at this as kind of a small business, if you will, within your bigger enterprise, and you're trying to build that out. Yeah, you've got that that's where that entrepreneurial mindset comes from. Can you elaborate a little bit more on why that is important? A lot of people listening to the podcast might not quite understand, like, what do you mean I have to build a business within this?
There's very few things you can do in a business other than, like, in this case, business development or partnerships, that if done well, touch all areas of the business. So I always think of like an octopus, and I've got like 8 legs all over the business. But wait, we started this conversation with marketplace. I have analogies, I've used them before, but as owning a small business, my wife owned a retail store once upon a time. And like, let's just say you accepted cash. But tomorrow you're like, wow, there's this whole set of users that wants to pay by credit card. And so I want to accept that. Well, one thing is to just say, I want to accept it. But the second is, wait, I need a bank account. I need a terminal to charge the cards. Wait, I need a merchant account to process the transactions. Wait, I used to get $1. Now I'm getting $1 less, some like Amex fees or Discover fees.
Wait, I need to reconcile between cash versus credit card purchase.
All of that. I've needed to change my accounting model, right? So even that is a completely different language that my finance team, my AP, AR, my CFO, that's very different. Marketplace touches money. That makes me valuable in the business, but also like there's a whole line of business there that you have to consider. Actually, I'm selling out of the country, taxation, that, like there's a whole nother thing that touches legal, right? I'm signing up for marketplace. There's these contracts, legal, terms of service, MSAs, whatever your company calls them, like you're involved in that. Where you report to is who's kind of giving me direction for what they want my function to do in the business. But as a shareholder and someone who's like, yeah, I want to make the company money. Well, revenue starts with pipeline. So now I'm touching sales, and most of us and many of us like align to the CRO function or the revenue side of the business. But guess what? There's 2 sides of revenue. Actually, there's 3. I call demand and marketing once, and I just touch marketing, the CMO. But in many companies, sometimes your renewal business is different than your net new sales business. So wow, I just touched 2 other lines of business, right? Because if I don't consider renewals, well, my renewals are some competitor's net new business. And my new business is obviously where I'd want to co-sell in some of this. So now I've just touched those line of businesses. Tackle helps me with operational excellence, but like a lot of the people, process, and technology. Wait, I just said ops. Now, wait, where does ops report? Sometimes to revenue, sometimes the COO. Oh my gosh, that's another line of business, right? All of them have different goals, different KPIs, different personalities. How do I ever make them want to work for me for this bigger outcome? Now, even if I am the CEO or the CEO sitting right next to me, that still doesn't mean that everyone wants to do what you want them to do in the time frame that you want them to do that.
Yeah. And you've got to like change how you talk to each of them. And as you navigate going and getting your business stakeholders on board and keeping them on board, you have to continue to pitch your business to them in a way that's meaningful to them and in the metrics that are going to matter for that particular area of the organization. I think I just had my own aha moment here for a minute, Michael, in that I'm an entrepreneur and created a business,
Absolutely.
sold my business to Tackle. And I now realize like why I'm so attracted to Cloud Alliance leaders inside of all of the partners that I've worked with, because we all share that entrepreneurial spirit. I do really think that that is a big key characteristic of a Cloud Alliance person. It's like you are an entrepreneur at heart. as an entrepreneur, we're sometimes really hard to manage. So, where do you think like this role should best align? Or in your experiences, like maybe sometimes in the beginning of a journey, in the earlier stages, you report into a different area of the business. And then as you mature, you might change. Can you share a little bit about how you've seen in your own experiences and across, having access to lots of folks in the network through Caddyshack, like where the alliance role typically is aligning and how that changes throughout the maturity?
I wouldn't have had this vantage point without kind of Caddyshack over time because, you talk to your peers and I'm doing the job and then I'm talking to others that have done the job before me or way more scaled than I or are just getting started. But I'm like you, I'm getting to talk to more business leaders, CROs, SVPs of channels and partners. I think at the end of the day, businesses exist to make money. So revenue should drive most of the businesses, but there's a lot of different tactics for where and how you make money, because I've also talked to peers that are measuring like marketing activities or influence, which still equates to revenue, or the number of integrations into AWS services that's really important to them. And I think depending on the outcome and depending why they would hire my role or someone like me or someone like you into that company, there's some why that happened before this. So I'm usually trying to figure out, why do they want to build a partnership with one of the cloud providers, right? Sure, of course, you're built on them, you're spending a bunch of money. I get that. But why do you want to do this? And do you understand what's involved? Depending on what it is, there's a bunch of different tactics and the kind of people you hire and what you do. But I do believe like whether it's under the CRO or whether it's under the CMO or the CRO, it's statistically higher under the CRO in revenue. But there are a lot of people under the COO, under the CTO, under the COO, just if I roll these lines of business directly for the CEO, right? So it really does matter. But I think the outcomes that you want kind of back into the goals that you'll have. And then where do those goals fit into the business probably makes the most sense as far as how I would line that up.
In the beginning, it's more where's partnerships or in operations like the COO. And then as you start to really get through that initial phase of like laying down those principles, then it moves over into like the CRO because it's like now we got to go really like impact our go-to-market and our revenue. And to really unlock that driving adoption and scaling adoption, we see a lot of times the alliance team shifts over into the CRO when they're kind of crossing that chasm from this was something we were incubating to now this is something that is going to be a meaningful revenue channel for us and we needed to align into the CRO.
Is it ever a meaningful revenue channel? That's the big question. But I do think there's a lot of value and intangibles to any business. But I think lesson number one that I've seen is that when people look at AWS or Google out of the gates as a channel or a VAR or something that they have experience, or a GSI that they have experience working with, and they apply that experience and that lens to this partner, I think there's just a misalignment forever of expectations. And I do believe whether we're talking about Google or AWS, they are incredibly impactful and helpful to your business, and they can definitely do things that you can't do on your own. But if it's like an ATM where I put in my card and I get a 20 out, like it doesn't work that way. And so I have to remember this conversation a couple times where I was like, what do I get out of them? What revenue or pipeline do I get? I was like, 0. First time I ever met my CFO, he asked me that question. I was like, 0. This doesn't make a lot of sense. And I was like, well, that's not the right question. It's kind of like, well, then what do we get? I was like, then now we're in a better discussion, right? Because if that's what you're expecting, you're going to be disappointed. But I do believe there is a lot of things that you can get over time, just like any partnership, or I talk a lot about like, I call partnerships, even in my own world, I call them friendships, just like your personal friendships. And most people have a lot of Facebook, LinkedIn connections. They know a lot of people, their neighbors, their ecosystem around them that are friends. But you probably have very few best friends in your world. And to get to that point, you're probably into similar things. It takes effort. And so I will quote someone at AWS who I think is awesome, but Carol Potts leads like the ISV sales team. And early on, I was like, how do you guys decide who you invest in? Which partners are the most important to you? And I was expecting this metric KPI, AWS, Amazon based answer. She's like, oh, well, we invest in the partners that invest in us. And I was like, wait, that sounds too easy. But from that lens, it made a lot of sense. It's like, I want to spend my time with the partners that understand our business and are able to, help us achieve our goals. That was many years ago, and it's always stuck with me as an example. But yeah, I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer. I think it depends on the founders. It depends on the industry. It depends on the competitors. It depends on where you are. Truth be told, at Lacework, when I started, I was like, who's our kind of competitor? And it was like, oh, well, Palo Alto, of course. I mean, Palo's an awesome company, huge, massive. And I was like, wow, they have a massive team and a massive partnership with AWS, Google, and Microsoft. Like, I'm way behind. I better go figure that out. Why? Because I'm aligned to sales. And I didn't want to put my sellers in a disadvantage to not be able to sell through the marketplace, to not be able to co-sell with AWS as an example. So that's where we started.
These are excellent points, and they all kind of back up the why. I want to make sure we didn't gloss over the fact that you said something critical here, which is like, you have to understand your why and why you're here. In our prep call, we talked a little bit about this, and it's something you brought up. I'd love for you to kind of talk through again in this lens, which is that you often talk to ISVs in your advisory capabilities or in your peer network, and you always ask them why first. Can you give some examples of like what a good why is? Because we all understand some of the bad whys and those expectation setting that you brought up. And I think that those are fantastic. But what's a good why?
I think everyone has experiences. So what you're trying to do is connect a future that they don't understand to the past of their own personal experiences. But if you don't understand, and a lot of times now I'll call it a North Star, where we're trying to get to in 2 or 3 years, or to understand kind of the past or the culture of the company or the business you're in or the competition you have or all of this stuff. I just landed here at Astronomer, right? Like, this company's been around for a few years. Like, we're a managed service built off of an open source Apache Airflow project that's turning 10 this year. There's a massive community of 2,900 developers, millions of downloads a month. I don't understand any of that, but someone here does. So it's our co-founders, our CEO, our CRO. Like, I need to go figure out why this stuff exists and then try to apply what I know now, the outcomes and the capabilities of partnering with the cloud, and try to connect these two things together. And then I do find that expectations is really the good and the bad, right? Because if you're expecting unnatural things or things that are really hard to do, or I love analogies. So I have always said, like, if the cloud or clouds are our solar system and AWS is our sun, then I want to be in Earth's position, right? I want to be close enough to get the warmth, but not far enough to freeze. But me expecting unnatural things is like changing gravity, or me telling the sun, like, hey, I'm cold today. Can you turn up the heat a little bit? It's just not going to work. So if your why is that, then that's okay. But maybe the cloud isn't the partnership that we invest in. Maybe that's not the right go to market. And I can't even remember one conversation I had with a peer, but like, they built awesome SaaS software. They were built in AWS and their customers were legal. And so they're like, I want to go build a partnership with AWS. And I was like, why? I was like, who are your customers? Law firms? Like, do they have AWS? Do they have committed spends? Like, no. I was like, why would you do that? This didn't make any sense for your business in your universe. There's much better partners that you should go find and build those relationships with that help you build pipeline, validate you, transact, whatever the answer is. But it's just not this galaxy, right? It's not this solar system. It's another one for you.
In there, once you know the why, we have this cloud flywheel. And so it's like, where you start in your flywheel could be different. So at Lacework, you started with marketplace and getting it operational and transactable. And then you went to co-sell. Where you start in the flywheel may also change depending on your why.
and depending on the resources, depending on the direction of the company. And I think much like with Tackle, we've been kind of learning this together, right? And also the sun keeps changing and moving around. There isn't a right or wrong answer. It really does kind of depend on you and the forces that you're dealing with. It's just kind of aligning that. And honestly, today, I would say to anyone, the best place to align these whys and figure it out is when you're interviewing. If what you know from your experiences and what's possible doesn't align to what the company wants, it's okay. Like, maybe that's not the right place for you. And so I think we think about that, or even the conversations I'm having, like, this is really important, but this other thing's really important. And for now, Astronomer, awesome, already transactable in all three marketplaces. I can already co-sell with all three. You kind of start with one, but I think you really need to do all three. I think of this like football and the three phases of offense, defense, and special teams. Like, you can absolutely have a great offense, but if the other team scores more points than you do because you have a bad defense, you still lose at the end of the day. So I think you need to think of the common C's, and I know we're headed that direction because that's kind of the framework that I think through. So I'll leave it there.
The misconception, like, what's one of the biggest misconceptions you've seen? So we talked about setting expectations, and I think in there is you find a lot of misconceptions. So what's one of the biggest misconceptions you've seen around unlocking cloud go-to-market in the organizations that you've been a part of?
So it actually was an analogy this weekend because it was very true to me, but I've used similar. Well, I had some friends that I saw this weekend, like our best friends, and they brought like 3 bags of like nectarines. Last year, I know they got a few, but they didn't taste right. But this year they were awesome, right? The snozberries taste like snozberries, and a Willy Wonka joke. But if you were to ask them, or if a business was asking me, like, what kind of revenue, what kind of pipeline do we get? What kind of nectarines do we get? By the way, I want them now, or I want them yesterday. Like, that's an unnatural question to ask about your nectarine tree that you just bought as a seedling or just planted the seed. And then what everyone kind of forgets in the middle is, like, to get 3 years to have these bags of nectarines, it wasn't like you just planted the seed and walked away and 3 years later this thing happened. You got out of it what you put into it. You watered it, you fertilized it, you did this. And I think if you have the right people and the right strategy and the right timeline, maybe it takes 2 years instead of 3. Maybe it takes 1 year instead of 3. But I can't tell you if you're ever going to get nectarines. I can't tell you how many you're going to actually harvest in 2 years, 3 years, 1 year. I mean, we could take this analogy all over the place, but it's really hard for a CEO to invest in partners or this line of business because it's the long tail of your business. And when they decide to spend $1 with me or my team, I'm deciding to not spend that dollar in engineering, writing code, and not spend that dollar on my sales team hiring a seller.
They're betting on the future gains.
So it's like, how do I scale my future sales team? How do I scale my future pipeline? Who's got millions of customers and like that kind of influence and reach? Very few people. The sun has very few competitors in our solar system. It's pretty powerful. Can you imagine if that sun gave us a award, like invited us to their podcast, like gave us a bunch of like gifts to go grow our go-to-market or expand our marketing budget, or, did things to help us? Again, awesome analogy too. It's like meeting a new neighbor and the first thing out of your mouth, like, hi, nice to meet you. I'm Michael. Can I borrow your lawnmower? That would just be really weird. That relationship is destined for like a really awkward time forever because you just met someone, you're asking them for pipeline, gifts, access. Like, that's probably not going to happen. And no one wants to spend their time with that person. Now I can go to my best friend and be like, hey, can I borrow your lawnmower? Like, but that's a natural thing. We've been friends for 10 years. So I think all of these things come into play from your personal and like joking life to like, this is business and here's partnerships.
Now that we know our why, we kind of have figured out how we're going to start, where in the flywheel we're going to start that aligns to helping me get the momentum going around our why. You have 2 additional C's. So we talk about co-sell, co-market, co-build. and you kind of have two additional C's. I'd love for you to share with the audience your C's. We've got them in our maturity model, but I love that you kind of just pulled them out and brought them front and center and said, there's 5 C's.
I think the ones that people forget is consumption. And there's 2 areas of consumption. Number one, it's much easier to be a friend of the cloud the more I spend. Let's just be honest, right? And there's more easy to kind of talk about better togethers and co-build and all these levers the more I commit and the more I spend. But there's another one that people don't think about. We called it drag. It turns out like my technology today is data orchestration and ETL and pipeline, data pipelines. So in this case, I'm like an air traffic controller kind of moving planes in an order sequence, land here at this time. Once this thing moves, go to your gate, then this thing comes in. Like we're sequencing all of this stuff. But the reality is I'm taking data from one place and I'm moving data to another place. And the reality is when I'm moving that stuff around, maybe I'm moving it into Redshift. Well, that's a pretty important service for AWS. I'm staging stuff in S3. That's pretty important. I'm driving consumption and compute. If you can figure out that drag, like what do you do and how is it affecting the customer's spend or the outcomes that the customer's trying to get to, grow revenue, reduce costs, whatever your value drivers you're attaching to, you need to connect your technology to that. And that all fits under the C for consumption. The last C, I've already said it in different ways, friends helping friends. And I call it champions, which a lot of sales playbooks do. People have a choice in who they spend time with, how much time they spend with them, what they offer them. People are going to spend their time with people they like, that understand what's important to them, their KPIs, their goals, and obviously are contributing to their own company's revenue success or their own personal metrics. And so I just call friends helping friends, but that C's for champions.
You can bucket those 2 last C's under like goodness, right? I've got a good story for my consumption and I'm a good person and I want to work with you.
It has to be authentic. I've met a lot of people that I can see from a mile away what they're up to and it just doesn't feel authentic, right? So you can't fake it. And it takes time, right? Like you can't rush it either. There's some tricks that I could do maybe to get those nectarines a year or 2 earlier. Like it doesn't happen overnight because trust takes time. Takes a very short, stupid time to break it. So you got to be careful too. And you got to think about the ongoing care and feeding. What if I stop watering that nectarine tree tomorrow? I get no more nectarines. Like you just broke your partnership. So you have to care and feed it.
I think we've just added a 6th C there for you, consistency at the end there, right?
Oh, I've got a lot more. Trust me. I can add like 10, but I think you have to at some point just say like, there's too many. How you use this though, it's funny, like my team still to this day, even when we're talking with our partners, we talk to them through these C's. Every decision we make, we're trying to map like what C's does this thing bucket? So it's turned into actionable strategy. Turns out it's the lens that your partner is measuring you through. So I guess it's okay. But also like when you're doing stuff, it helps to kind of map it back to like, why are we doing this? Where does it fit? And a lot of times the best things are when you're combining them together. And I'll give you an example. I've built this integration with some service that now we're writing a blog and we're going to go market that blog and we're going to generate pipeline that we're going to co-sell. That's how you put the stuff together.
You've got co-sell, co-build, co-market, but the other C's you're talking about are the attributes or factors that can really accelerate the experience in those. Caring, champions, consistency are all like key attributes that can affect your co-build, your co-sell, and your cloud go-to-market.
Michael, as you look at your kind of your framework of C's here, as you're taking on a large undertaking with, now taking on Astronomer and looking at how you're going to continue to grow them, you've got a lot of expertise through your advisement with Caddyshack, and you've seen a lot change over the last few years. What trends do you see looking forward that are shaping kind of the future of this space for your role and for these partnerships? Is there anything that stands out as a trend to you and something that we should all keep our eye on?
I think it comes back to all the discussions we've had is it's going to be different for each company and each industry and each leader and all of that. But I do think that it's not going away. And I commonly will joke like, AWS is telling me they're 85% of the world's workloads are still not in a public cloud. So like, wow, there's a long way to go. It feels like some of us have been doing this for 5 or 10 years. Tackle's been around for a long time, but it's still maturing and the variables, the target keeps kind of moving around about. So there isn't a one word or right or wrong answer, but I think the secret here is in kind of this discussion, and the hard part is, and I make no qualms about this cloud partnership isn't for everyone. And I'll quote my Caddyshack partner that he says, just by being in the marketplace is like being a product in the largest Walmart in the US. It doesn't mean that anyone is buying it. It doesn't mean anyone finds it in row 37 on the bottom shelf in the back. You still have to go do something with it. But if your business and your customers are pulling you this way, if there's gravity, that makes a lot of sense, right? So I think it depends on what your North Star is, your why. But I do still fundamentally believe that it's still early, it's maturing. So now everyone's doing it. So sometimes by competition, you have to figure it out and you should incorporate it in your business, but it's not easy either, right? And so your expectations and what you want out of it, and what you put into it is always going to be a decision that a business has to make.
I picture like an Instagram video of like someone walking through Walmart, like, let me come show you where our product is and like why it's so amazing and you have to go buy it. And then when it changes shelves, let me go tell you where we are now. And like, it's over here now, right? You've got to put in all of that extra go to marketing around getting that product out to the market.
And like my football analogy, many teams have an awesome offense and the other team just scores more points and you lose. So like nobody wants to lose, right? Or I'm a Chargers fan. I don't like to admit this, but like they've had years of like terrible special teams. So it's like you've lost games because the function that is probably less important than offense and defense has lost games for you. And so the thing about the 3 C's is like if you're just doing co-sell all the time and you never think about the co-building or the co-innovation, and like that's the sticky stuff, but it's really hard. Someone's writing code, right? Or you never actually connected it to pipeline or the marketing funds or the programs. Like you're just missing a part of the game. So I think balance is the other. It's there, but you get out of any partnership which you put into it. And these kind of understanding your partner and balancing that, I think that's kind of the home run.
How do you stay flexible? Because like the clouds are always like, this is always changing. It's an always evolving. What advice do you have for a Cloud Alliance leader who's newer in this role to like stay flexible, keep up with the ever and changing environment that they're now in?
I think probably like you, through my career, I didn't know that I wanted to do this job, but I just knew other things. And I think for every job that I wanted that I wasn't doing, I would find people who were doing that job and I would ask them questions, or I would find what they're doing to learn. I would more or less put myself in a position to do that job before I've ever done that job. And I think hiring managers always want to see that. So I actually had someone last week ask me these same questions like, hey, I'm doing this in the company, but I've always been curious about your world. Like, what could I do to get started? And I was like, well, there's podcasts like this. I have a podcast, there's groups, there's LinkedIn stuff, there's assets. Like none of that stuff really existed 5 years ago. So if I wanted to get into this space, I would start with like trying to learn as much as I could from those and others that are already doing it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of the answer, because that opportunity may or may not present itself, but you kind of set your own North Star and you figure out, what do I need to know to put myself into a position? And so I commonly refer, my favorite definition, mine or someone that I heard, of the word luck was when prior preparation meets opportunity. And so like a lot of people see luck as like, oh yeah, I bought a lottery ticket and I won. Okay, I guess that's lucky. But most people are preparing for their own destiny through education, learning, partnerships, friends, whatever. And then the opportunity opens themselves up to go like execute. And so that others might look at that as being lucky, but you're the one that put in that grind for years to get yourself to position for that opportunity.
I love that you found friendships inside of Tackle that you have built at Laceworks, and you're continuing, to partner with us and allow your friends at Tackle to help you now at Astronomer.
Yeah, it's one of my secret weapons, right? In the beginning, I said this, you guys interact. I was one company, team of one, but you had already sold and had a bunch of customers. So one, I met a lot of your customers. I've asked them how they were doing. My sales team, Brian Badillo's out there somewhere in the ether. Like, he was awesome. He was a consultant, right? He wasn't selling to us. He was trying to figure out where we were, where we wanted to go, how Tackle could help. I think that was like really awesome. So even getting onboarded, a lot of the folks are still at Tackle, some are not, but like they all had experiences onboarding other customers and other marketplaces or co-sell. So I would just ask them a ton of questions. There were a wealth of conversation about like, what did that company do? Or like, this is where we are and what our business does. Like, what do you recommend that we do? I still never call you guys a vendor. You've always been a partner to our business, right? Like, we could do this, but we do it better and faster because of Tackle. I give you money in exchange for services, but we've always been kind of a partner on this journey. And so I'm super appreciative to you both and, John and Brian and Dylan and everyone, Doug, everyone over the years.
I know we didn't have you for too long, so I do want to respect your time, but thank you for being so gracious with it. This was very insightful for us. We were lucky to have you as a partner and an ally. You've done a lot for Tackle, and we certainly hope to continue to support you all, and especially in your new journey, Michael. So thanks for being a good repeat customer. But for our listeners, if you want to learn more about Michael, you can check out his LinkedIn. Erin, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to say thanks again, Michael, for coming on and sharing your experiences over the last, 5 or so years in this space of cloud go to market. You've got so many great lessons learned, and thank you for participating, not just being a consumer of the community, but also contributing to the community in all that you do.
Happy to. And I think you guys, I learned by helping others too, because then I learned something, some angles, something that I didn't think of. So I've realized giving back is actually a unique way for me to validate the lessons I've learned or learn something that I didn't even consider, because
Give.
this stuff does keep changing. So thank you for having me. I do appreciate it. And obviously thanks to Tackle and the whole team. It's been an awesome 5-year journey with you guys.
Oh my gosh, that was such a great conversation. I could have talked to him longer on especially some of those analogies that he had. I was like, I could have kept going and kept building on them.
I know he's a super busy guy, so he gave us a lot of his time, and we appreciate it. He does a lot for Tackle, but there's so much to unpack there. Erin, I know you, I saw you take notes a couple times, and can you tell me what are some of the top things that you took away from that conversation?
I had my own aha moment in listening to and having this conversation with him around cloud alliance leaders, like really good cloud alliance leaders, are entrepreneurials at heart. And I think that has really resonated with me as an entrepreneur, and why I have loved this space for over 10 plus years is the opportunity to work closely with other like-minded individuals, mini entrepreneurs inside of these organizations trying to build their business inside their business. And I've just really gravitated towards that. I was like, oh my gosh, yes, like these are my people.
Yeah, you do see that. I'd never heard that before, but as soon as he said that, I was like, yes, that's right.
And he was like, and partnerships are more like friendships. And when I think about my circle of people in my network and the customers that I've worked with, most of my customers do turn into friendships, like inside of work and outside of work.
It's not a big space. Everybody thinks like, oh, we throw around all the numbers of the cloud providers and we see the thousands of sales reps, but like the community, the ISV community, the advisors, those who like to share, those alliance leaders, like it's really small.
Yeah. And that growth mindset just keeps coming back, right? You have to have a growth mindset around cloud go to market, because it's a challenge and it's a puzzle that you have to unlock, and it's going to constantly have changing pieces. and you have a new puzzle to figure out inside of there to continue to grow and unlock doing more business with your cloud partnership.
Yeah. And without that, I mean, you're going to get pretty stagnant pretty fast because the cloud providers are coming out with updates all the time, and Google changing to the agency model, and AWS rolling out new ways to send private offers. Like all these things change constantly. So you need to have that mindset to evolve to it. Yeah. Good point.
I always thought about it as like it takes a little bit of the characteristics of this role as an athlete, right? Like an athlete knows like you have goals, but you're always competing against yourself. You always have to kind of like keep training, keep going out there and trying to do better and get better. And as athletes, like we deal with like losses and defeats, and we have to pick ourselves back up and like keep going, right? So I think it's like that entrepreneurial meets an athlete. Boom, Cloud Alliance leader.
Yeah. And then run it on that flywheel. I'm so glad you made that connection. That was a great connection.
Well, I really hope our listeners enjoyed this conversation with Michael just as much as we did. I'm so fortunate to like get to know him more through this tackle experience. Love that we built that friendship at Lacework. He continues to take that friendship to Astronomer and into wherever he goes next. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening to this week's episode of Unlock Cloud Go-to-Market. I'm your co-host, Erin Feiger.
And I'm co-host Patrick Riley.
Until next week.
So pull up a chair, grab a notebook, and join us as we share the essential stages of the maturity model to start, optimize, and grow your company's revenue using the cloud. For more resources on executing your cloud go-to-market strategy, you can visit our website at tackle.io.